Hello, it's Scott Manley here with episode 99.5 of Interstellar Quest, because I really wanted to do something special for episode 100, but due to conflicting schedules and stuff, that's not going to happen, so we'll maybe save episode 100 for a time when I can actually get to do some live streaming. Yes, real life can get to be very inconvenient, what with, children's plays, education, and visits to NASA to see rocket launches, which will be happening in the next week, and I hope to bring you pictures and videos and other things. However, Archibald Kerman is at the controls of the Draco, coming over the top and of course down to the lowest point of the orbit, where we want to slow the spacecraft down so that he may re-enter at a reasonable speed. Okay, we're getting aligned and throttle up. Throttle up. Why aren't you throttling up? Status flamed out. That's not a good sign. It has fuel flow is 0. Specific impulse is really high, of course. Oh, cause tritium depleted. That's not a good sign. But it actually says tritium 0.70. Why would tritium be depleted? I'm confused. What does the fuel balancer say? Where is my tritium? It says... well, it has numbers against all of those. Oh, not a number. And it's not being fixed by balancing all either. That is a problem. So not a number is what happens when you divide a value by 0 in floating point numbers. Oh great, now I've managed to make everything not a number, so I've now completely obliterated my entire tritium supply. Okay, so not only have I managed to cause some sort of error in one of my fuel tanks, I've managed to propagate it to all of my fuel tanks. The deuterium also has not a number in the fusion reactor, which is really odd. I have megajoules of power, which is what I don't get. Surely I should have been able to light that sucker for a little while. Okay, and... I mean, yes... so not a number, yes, what happens when you divide something by 0, basically, it doesn't mean anything mathematically, because if dividing something by 0 gave you plus or minus infinity, something that made sense, you could come up with very simple equations that would say things like 1 is equal to 2, and that would cause any sensible mathematician to run screaming to the hills. So I guess a rescue mission will be in order. However, meanwhile, I have other loose ends to deal with. We, of course, have our Jupiter satellite lander, which is very carefully wending its way towards Val, making a tiny course correction to make sure I don't actually crash into the surface. Apparently, I had got things lined up too well. And then we'll spend another little jaunt around Joule till we get everything close. Look, oh, I love this. I love flying around Joule, where you can admire the moons zipping around their parent body. And with a flicker of the nav ball, I am now in orbit, or at least in the sphere of influence around Val. So plot myself a little capture orbit. Val's surface gravity is very similar to the Moon, but it's larger and therefore it has a larger orbital velocity and hence escape velocity. I'm sure you know by now that escape velocity is always equal to the square root of 2 multiplied by the circular orbital velocity for a given altitude. But before we go into a perfect circular orbit, we shall pause for a moment to get rid of some excess baggage, leaving it on this highly eccentric orbit. These fuel tanks are now no longer any good to me. They are to be abandoned and set off for their own course, their own path, which will ultimately, with a bit of rocketry wizardry, bring them down to the surface of Val at speeds exceeding 1 kilometer per second. But we say farewell to them for now. Our spacecraft... it's kind of disappointing that spacecraft doesn't look the way I expected it. Obviously that was supposed to be a giant radar dish, but it never unfurled correctly, and I'm too lazy to open up the save file and fix everything on that to make it work properly. Anyway, after a quick check of orbital parameters, it's decided that the odds of me actually getting anywhere near Valhenge is just 0, so I just figure out I'll go for the first daylight side that I can point it at. So I start my descent. Very carefully and very rapidly, just slowing down, bringing the spacecraft under control and committing a regular touchdown. This spacecraft is, of course, in a race against time because the interplanetary lab will be absolutely capable of performing a manned landing on Val very quickly. In fact, they will have enough fuel and energy to pick their target site with ease. So the team behind this spacecraft has decided to get the spacecraft down as quickly as possible so that they can claim some sort of first. If you remember, this is one of 4 probes that were designed with this, that followed this design, one of which is on its way to Elu, and one of which landed on Dres, and the last one has still to enter the sphere of influence of Joule. The final one will probably head over to Paul, because that's one which has not been touched, and that will leave the interplanetary lab to pay a visit to Tylo. And only then can we truly claim that our discovery, our mission to explore the Kerbal system has been a complete success. But yes, bringing it down to the surface, of course, ever so carefully, and touchdown. Excellent. Now to read the all-important scientific messages. We have the gravioli detector. You read the long list of complicated numbers and equations and wonder if you could repurpose this machine to calculate your taxes. Yes, collect impact data, or log seismic data, sorry. Whoa, what a quake! Something big must have just shifted. Yeah, because I just landed there, huh? It's surprised to see me. You accidentally drop some ice in the lab onto the surface. You wonder if there's a way to tell the difference between Kerbin's ice and Val's ice. Well, Val's ice is blue and Kerbin's ice is white, right? That's what I remember. And the mystery goo... It oscillates once, then 3 times, then finally 9 times. I see a progression here. You know, I think the goo may have become sentient and is trying to communicate with us. Log temperature. There is a section below the surface that has a surprisingly high temperature for Val. Being Val, of course, it's still quite cold. And so, of course, we returned to one of the spacecraft we left in orbit. Now, I deliberately left it in a highly eccentric orbit because that would mean that it would require the least amount of fuel to make sure it could deorbit it onto the surface. So, yeah, we wait to get out to Apoapс, turn it around. We've obviously deployed the solar cells to make sure that it would survive. And yeah, there we go. We're firing those RCS thrusters in reverse translation mode, obviously. The 21 kilometers. We have to bring up the nav ball, unfortunately. And there we go. 12, 9, 8, 7, 6, 4. 4 I think is low enough. But let's make sure. 3.3 kilometers. That should be fine. And now we have to spend one more cycle around Val, dipping ever closer and closer towards the surface, and then getting told, actually, that we can't do time acceleration at the levels that we would like. 3, 2, 1. How low will it get? 4 kilometers. And oh, just under 4 kilometers. What a great start, huh? Obviously, that altitude is another really useful data point in the topography of Val. Actually, it would be kind of cool to build a radar that literally crashes things into the surface so that you get an idea of the topology instead of, shooting radio waves into the surface. And yeah, incidentally, in the last few hours, asteroid 2004 BL86 has zipped by the Earth at about 3 lunar distances. It is huge, and it is close enough that we have been able to zap it with the radar, get reflections, and find out that it actually has a pet rock as a friend, or rather it has a little moon. Sadly, the Interplanetary Lab demonstrates that spacecraft in Kerbal Space Program really are just collections of parts held together by forces that approximate reality. And an untimely application of time acceleration leads to the spacecraft breaking. For a moment I thought, yeah, I could just fire the engine, but it turns out that I have plenty of time before I need to actually burn. So of course we get out one of the crew and send him all the way down the length of this spacecraft. To be honest, Sidze is volunteering to do this because, hey, look at the awesome pictures you can get. Of course, he's not realizing that if he wants this picture, he would need to have another Kerbal out with him, playing like the camera in the third person. I imagine there's like a turtle on a cloud holding a camera zipping around for your third person viewpoint, right? That's how it works, isn't it? Okay, so link these up and link the other ones up. Turns out, incidentally, that when the frame rate is down to like 4 frames per second, that actually just clicking on some of these objects is frequently rejected by the software. So you will find that when you're trying to click on these larger vessels, that just sometimes you can't get the window up first time, so you need to spam right click or whatever if you want to do crew reports and things like that. Incidentally, that crew report, if you didn't read it, it says, "You see jewels sparkling below you like an endless ocean of glittering green." So now we've turned it around, we're ready to start getting on our way to wherever we're going. Well, I've already mentioned we are targeting Tylo. So for Tylo, we need to bring our apoaps out to about 63.5 thousand kilometers, which is, of course, absolutely tiny, but in Kerbal scales, it's far enough. This, of course, took a while, which I'm sure you can appreciate. Things happen very slowly when you have spacecraft this size. Of course, it's times like these I can sit down with my laptop and actually do some real work while this goes on in the background. Writing some code, making some awesome stuff happening for my day job, helping the kids with their homework, trying to explain the newfangled ways they teach mathematics these days. It's all very complicated. I mean, with all my years of mathematics, I actually find it very hard to understand how elementary school teachers are teaching mathematics. And I'm sure they've done a lot of research to figure out the best way to do it. But I, for the life of me, can't figure out what the idea is in half of these cases. As long as it works for the kids. Anyway, yeah, of course, we now have to raise our periaps up, bring it up above that of Val. We certainly don't want to be encountering Val. And then we want to leave the ascending or descending node close enough to the orbit of Tylo that we will get an encounter soon. Now, returning to Kerbin, we have one piece of technology which I haven't really tested, and since we need a rescue ship, this is what I've done. So, okay, regular stage, the launch stage, not that interesting. It's just a bunch of solid rocket boosters coerced together into one big mass here. Ferrometer space is, of course, giving us warnings about high dynamic pressure, but we just soldier on, and once we get high enough, the warnings evaporate. I'm going up very, very vertical, let's say. The reason is because we have a new drive system here. And the new drive system actually is the old drive system. This is the plasma rocket. If you remember, the plasma rocket offers relatively high efficiency, but needs fuel. Well, if you have unlocked all of the tech tree, including warp drive, then you get access to the quantum electrodynamic vacuum thruster thingy. Okay, look, what did I say? If I right-click on it, it says type of fuel, quantum vacuum. And you can switch it to other fuel supplies. I get a whole 53 kilonewtons of thrust, which is why I go into this highly eccentric orbit, because I wanted to stay up high enough for long enough to make sure that it can actually get into orbit. Yeah, quantum vacuum is an interesting theory which most physicists rightly believe shouldn't work. But there's a solid core of people that believe that quantum vacuum thrusters can actually be made to work and provide linear momentum changes. You know, the idea is that space isn't empty. Even empty space isn't empty. There's vacuum energy, there's virtual particles, there's all sorts of stuff teeming, coming in and out of existence, annihilating, creating, spawning. And if you could just push against this background, then surely you can push a spacecraft along. So there's a whole bunch of interesting mechanisms, some of which claim to have been tested and worked, and would be great if they would do that, but or they would be great if they could verify this, but so far nobody has produced a verified system that has been verified by multiple third parties and vetted and things like that. So the jury is definitely still out on quantum vacuum thrusters, but it would be really cool if they actually worked. And I should point out that while I am not a respectable physicist by any means, I'm definitely in the camp of, I don't think they'll work, but it would be nice if somebody would prove it. Anyway, using that, we of course have plenty of oomph in the engine to put ourselves onto an encounter with the Draco, which is stranded in its highly eccentric orbit over the poles. Now, I had thought that I would be able to send a spacecraft up with some fuel, but then I realised that since I tried to pump the fuel around, it had not done good things. In fact, it seemed that the pox upon the fuel supply had spread from one receptacle to another. So this is merely going to fly alongside, isn't going to dock or anything, for fear that perhaps it will acquire the inability to use its own engines here. This is fueled by a deuterium-tritium nuclear fusion reactor. But of course, the engine isn't different. It's, the fusion, the deuterium-tritium fusion drive system is obviously the drive of choice, but it does have the whole problem with maneuvering near to other spacecraft because the radiation it puts out will happily kill off anybody nearby. So this is a little more nice in that respect, even if it doesn't have the thrust to lift off directly from Kerbal. And actually, I don't think the quantum vacuum thruster will work when it's inside an atmosphere. Anyway, park it next to the target, bring the velocity down to 0, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Bingo! We're now parked, and now we're waiting for the crew to bring themselves over. So we have first of all, the scientist sitting in his little crew cabin there, Albus Kerman. Albus, we want you to pick up all the science and transport it over there. Just stuff it all in bags. I guess I hadn't actually bothered emptying these things. All the science was left in all of these items, although there wasn't much in the way of science that we had collected with these ones, since we'd already maxed out the science using previous space probes. Oh no, I'm getting attacked! I'm getting attacked by the spacecraft! It doesn't want me to leave! Oh, wow, that NaN infection is crazy. Yeah, NaNs are like an internal computer representation of a floating point number failure condition. And, okay, so you get it by dividing a number by 0 and you get not a number. The fun thing about not a number is if you then perform any other mathematical operations involving that, then the other numbers involved all become not a numbers too, NaNs. So NaNs are infectious, and they can start in one place on their code and just end up going everywhere and infecting all sorts of data structures if you're not careful. And sometimes you can get things like loops that get stuck in infinite loops because you're expecting two numbers to be equal at some point, and not a number is never equal to anything else. It's not even equal to itself. If you go have a program and you say, is not a number equal to not a number, it will say, no, they're not equal because they're clearly not the same thing, even though they are the same thing in memory. It's an interesting feature, let's say. You know, floating point mathematics and computers has a whole bunch of fascinating pitfalls that people fall into. Anyway, we don't want to dock. We don't want to try and transfer fuel. We would like to deorbit this spacecraft. So it's decided that I'm going to go for the good old Pardo push here. A technique which I have been using since before you could dock spacecraft in Kerbal space program. So we just turn the spacecraft around. I don't have a reaction control system here, so translation is not really available. At this point, it would be nice to actually have little vacuum, quantum vacuum RCS thrusters. That would be a nice thing to have. So we bring it in, and we're aiming for the cargo bay, which is not as easy as it seems because the targeting is set to the bridge, to the command capsule, which is in a completely different location. So I have to kind of just guesstimate where that is, and then carefully put the spacecraft in there. And the Draco is able to hold attitude because it has an autopilot and everything. And this allows me to start reducing the periaps down inside the atmosphere so that we can also land it and investigate what sort of pox has taken over its fuel system. However, we shall have to find out about that in a future episode. Until then, I'm Scott Manley. Fly safe.